3 years and 10 days after Alabama and Georgia met in the first, and only, college football national championship game contested on Northern soil, Ohio State and Notre Dame returned the favor. On January 20th, 2025, the Buckeyes and Fighting Irish played in the inaugural title game of the expanded 12-team college football playoff. The game was held at Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium, a shining jewel of a facility in the heart of a city that fancies itself the capital of college football. What folks really mean by that is that Atlanta is the capital of Southern college football. Atlanta has only hosted the national title game twice. Its importance to college football is more centered on it being the home of the College Football Hall of Fame, which until 2012 had been in South Bend, Indiana.
By the way, can we get a more apt metaphor for the South taking over college football than it's stealing the Hall of Fame? Hall of Fame ground was first broken on the campus of Rutgers, where college football was founded, in 1966, but it never got built. The hall opened outside Cincinnati in 1978, moved to South Bend in 1995, and then SEC country swiped it during the middle of the 25-year winter. New Jersey to Ohio to Notre Dame to Georgia. That's a roadmap of this sport's power shift. Anyway.
Atlanta's claim to being the capital of college football is really about it being the host of the SEC championship. The first two SEC title games in 1992 and 1993 were played at Legion Field in Birmingham, Alabama. Since then, they've all been played in Atlanta. So while the SEC offices are in Birmingham, the conference is probably more closely associated with Atlanta. Depending on your point of view then, Atlanta was a fitting setting for what was the second straight North versus North national championship, a guarantee that for the second straight year, the South wouldn't be winning college football's ultimate prize.
This is the 25-year winter, how championship college football went dormant in the North. This 5-part podcast series will dive into the failings of Northern college football and the dominance of Southern college football in the modern era. I'm Doug Lesmerises.
I'm Bill Landis, and we're the co-hosts of the Kings of the North College Football Show. This is episode 5, closing the book on a quarter century of Southern dominance and looking at what comes next. When Michigan beat Washington in the 2024 title game in Houston, you could convince yourself that such a matchup was an outlier in a sport that had been dominated by one region, and mostly one conference within that region, for a quarter century. Even if the Wolverines and Huskies beat SEC champ Alabama and soon-to-be SEC member Texas in their respective semifinal games. Plus, the optics of the game being in Houston didn't hit quite as hard as a North versus North game in the capital of SEC football. The South hosting a game that signified that college football was no longer solely its playground. It wasn't just that Ohio State and Notre Dame met in Atlanta. They laid waste to the SEC on their way there. Ohio State opened the playoff by blitzing Tennessee 42-17 in Columbus. The Buckeyes' semifinal victory was a tight 28-14 win against SEC runner-up Texas in the Cotton Bowl outside of Dallas, played amidst a sea of burnt orange 3 hours from the Longhorns campus in Austin. Notre Dame beat SEC champion Georgia 23-10 in the semifinal at the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, another Southeastern Conference stronghold. 3 SEC teams made the 2024 college football playoff. Ohio State and Notre Dame combined to eliminate all 3. They brought their teams, fans, and Northern vibes to the South. Doug and I were there for that game, and Doug hit the streets prior to see how the North was feeling about its Atlanta invasion. Here's how one Ohio State fan put it.
To be part of this Northern invasion of Atlanta.
You know what? I was telling my brother this before the game. It's so nice to be here without any SEC teams.
You're singing our song.
Yes, I love it. They don't have, no more of those floppy haircuts and their polo shirts and all that other stuff. Yeah, this is North football. We're here.
We got North teams.
By the way, when I say that Ohio State and Notre Dame brought the North to Atlanta, I mean they really brought the North to Atlanta. The high temperature on the day of the national championship was 31 degrees. That, of course, had little impact on a game played in a dome, but the wind tunnel ripping through the stadium actually made it pretty cold down on the field. The next day, Atlanta's airport had to issue a ground stop because of a snow and ice storm that blew through. The signs were there. 2 Northern powers emerged from a semifinal round in which 3 of the 4 teams were from the North. SEC country was transformed into a frigid Northern football snow globe. The shift from full-on Southern supremacy in college football was impossible to deny. Or at least it should have been. That narrative wasn't really present during the ESPN broadcast of the title game. This is where we note that ESPN, starting with the 2024 season, became the exclusive rights holder of SEC football and men's basketball. So the pregame packages instead spoke of Newt Rockne and Woody Hayes, certainly understandable. They made mention of the fact that Ohio State and Notre Dame, despite being separated by just 253 miles, were meeting for only the 9th time ever. No doubt a scheduling peculiarity. Absent? The North versus North thing. It didn't really seem to land with the power brokers and broadcast partners. Or maybe they just willingly ignored it. The truth can be uncomfortable.
The longest, toughest postseason climb in the history of the sport. And after all that, it's Ohio State together at the mountaintop. Champions of college football.
Ohio State was on top, 1 year after Michigan claimed the crown. Put another way, the North was back. Or put less dramatically, balance had returned to the sport. Remember, balance, once present in college football and then stunningly absent for 25 years, is what we've really been analyzing here. It existed, then it evaporated. How? Why? We hope we've laid that out for you over these last 4 episodes with our discussions about coaches, players, demographics, attitudes, and everything that led to the sport shifting south. Now, we're going to tell you why we think that era is over. Back-to-back years of Northern champions and North versus North championship games has rid college football of the feeling that the South looms as this kind of inevitable force. Will the Southern program win a national championship again? Of course. Will we springboard from this most recent Northern championship run into another 2+ decades of the South winning it all almost every year? We don't think so. It seems like too much is changing for that to be our reality. Back to 2021. An Alabama versus Georgia national title game to culminate that season wasn't surprising. The Crimson Tide were the preseason number 1 and defending national champs. Georgia was preseason number 5. They met as top 3 teams in the SEC championship. Both were part of a small pool of teams considered national championship contenders going into that season. Bama was the favorite, and 4 other teams had better than 10-1 odds. Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. 4 South, 1 North among the title contenders. That Indianapolis, a, quote, cold weather city, hosted the national championship that year was a novelty. That the game featured 2 Southern powerhouses wasn't. By the way, ESPN didn't forget to mention the regional dynamics at play in that game.
In frigid Indianapolis, 2 Southern neighbors battle for the ultimate prize in college football. A rivalry those
Georgia claimed championship gold in the North. Different setting, same result. Another SEC champ. The 6th SEC school to win a title over our 25-year period, and the 11th different Southern school. 2 Northern teams, Michigan and Cincinnati, lost in the college football playoff semifinals that year, ensuring that South versus South game in Indianapolis. Northern programs certainly had reason to dream about playing for a title in their part of the country when the season began. Ohio State, Iowa State, Cincinnati, Notre Dame, Oregon, and Wisconsin were all in the top 12 of the preseason Associated Press poll. When the first CFP rankings came out that year, Michigan State, Oregon, Ohio State, Cincinnati, Michigan, and Notre Dame gave the North 6 of the top 10 teams in the early playoff race. To go from that to ending up with no Northern presence in a North-based national title game just further contributed to the reality of Southern superiority. So, back-to-back North versus North title games in the South felt like something noteworthy. More than that, it felt seismic. Ohio State's representatives for the pregame coin toss included linebacker Cody Simon from New Jersey, receiver Emeka Egbuka from Washington, defensive end Jack Sawyer from Ohio, and honorary captain / Buckeye legend Archie Griffin, also from Ohio. Notre Dame's contingent included linebacker Jack Kaiser from Indiana, defensive tackle Howard Cross from New Jersey, safety Xavier Watts from Nebraska, and honorary captain Jerome Bettis from Michigan. To add insult to injury, referees from the SEC officiated that game. When the head of the officiating crew introduced himself as being from the Southeastern Conference, he was booed.
I'm Steve Marlowe. I'll be your referee. Brent Soule will be your umpire. And we're from the Southeastern Conference. The coin today, heads.
Imagine that. The SEC getting booed in Atlanta. I'm not trying to get all ESCCPN here, but isn't it a little odd that there was no mention of the North versus North thing, or that the game was being played in Atlanta, or that, I don't know, the entire dynamic of the sport felt like it was shifting?
Listen, I've tried to be nice and calm here and keep it together during this podcast series, but this makes my blood boil, Bill. That when it's in the North, South versus South matters, and when it's in the South, North versus North is ignored. Oh man. Oh, yeah. It's right. It's all about, as we've talked about many times in this series, Bill, perception. And whether it's purposeful or not, I don't think we can deny that there was a difference here, and that difference tells us something. Because aside from us pounding the drum about the North, it didn't seem like anyone else was really talking about Ohio State versus Notre Dame in those terms.
No, they weren't. And if they were, it's usually because we nudge them in that direction. I'm reminded, by the way, of you asking Penn State head coach James Franklin ahead of their semifinal against Notre Dame whether Michigan winning it all in 2023 and then 3 Northern teams being among the 4 semifinalists the year after was indicative of a shift within the sport. Here's what Franklin said.
And I think there are some changes going on right now. What that is specific to, I'm not necessarily sure. I don't know if there's enough data points and enough information to kind of make a strong statement on it. But as we all know, there's been a ton of changes in college football, really over the last 5 years, probably more so than maybe in the 25 years before it. And the programs that are embracing that, the programs that are being creative and aggressive. And I also think a really important word is being bold and aggressive, which is what we're trying to do. Then I think it's helping. And those things are showing up. And you look at the playoffs right now, college football playoffs, there's a ton of teams. I also think it's good for college football that there's more teams represented. There's more parts of the country represented. And it's not kind of the same old story. So not exactly sure. We'll have a better idea maybe a couple of years from now. But I do think it's a good storyline for college football right now.
So Franklin wasn't exactly as vociferous about these changes as we've been, and it would probably be difficult to get a coach to go all the way there, but we'll take it. It was nice to have an acknowledgement from a prominent Northern coach that things might be shifting back to a place where the North can more regularly find itself reigning over the sport.
I do think you can already sense some Southern insecurity creeping in. Imagine that. We had to endure diatribes about SEC's strength of schedule throughout the postseason when the conference only got 3 teams in the field compared to 4 from the Big Ten plus Notre Dame. The regional breakdown in the playoff was 6 North, 5 South, and then Arizona State, which is great, except the South couldn't stomach it. I'm reminded of something else from last postseason. Once we were on the ground in Atlanta getting ready for Ohio State versus Notre Dame. Across the street from the media hotel was the Georgia's own credit union building. It's a 32-story downtown high-rise, perfectly visible from the area around Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There's an LED video board at the top of that 450-foot building, a prominent feature of Atlanta's skyline. What did that video board say on the day before the national championship? Go Dogs, with a Georgia logo. Talk about FOMO.
Talk about desperation.
Talk about not knowing how to process a world where the North might once again be able to hold its own. That reminds me of one more thing. Let's talk about the time a shirtless Jim Harbaugh made Nick Saban punch a podium.
In our discussion of players in episode 3, we laid out the stark geographic realities of building rosters in the North and the South. Shorthand, the South has more good high school players, a lot more. While we think much is changing in and around college football, that discrepancy in high school talent is not. It will remain an uphill battle that the North must overcome to keep pace with the South. We'll tell you later how that appears to be happening. First, we want to revisit oversigning. Remember that? Southern schools, primarily in the SEC, were quite comfortable signing upwards of 30 to 35 players in their recruiting classes in the late 2000s and into the 2010s. At the same time, the Big Ten had outlawed the practice more than a decade before NASA put a man on the moon. Those two dynamics, one side playing fast and loose with loopholes, and the other turning its nose up at a potential roster advantage for 60 years, underscored our two opposing ideologies as much as anything we've discussed here. Well, I'm here to tell you that the Big Ten was not always so stodgy with every little facet of the NCAA rulebook. The NCAA has a rule 13.12.1.2, that prohibits schools from hosting developmental camps for kids or high school-aged athletes, more than 50 miles from their campus. However, there is an exception that allows coaches to serve as guest counselors at camps hosted by other schools, whether those are other colleges or high schools, no matter how far away they are. In a funny twist, it was the SEC that ignored that exception and prohibited its members from straying more than 50 miles from campus for a camp in any capacity. The ACC had a similar rule. Can't go more than 50 miles away. The Big Ten did not. And that's how the whole satellite camp fiasco that dominated recruiting conversations around 2015 came to be. In a role reversal, it was the Big Ten pushing the envelope. The words satellite camps, for some, instantly conjure an image of a shirtless Jim Harbaugh, then early in his tenure as Michigan's head coach, running around with campers at Prattville High School in Alabama, 90 minutes southeast of the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And once again, we'll have plenty to say about Harbaugh in a moment. But first, a tip of the cap where it's due. It was Franklin, the Penn State coach, who first started needling SEC coaches with a Southern incursion that drew some spicy rhetoric from folks who didn't like the North infringing on Southern territory. In the summer of 2014, before Franklin had coached a game in State College, he took his staff on the road for two Southern camps. One was in Atlanta, hosted by Georgia State. The other was in Northeast Florida, hosted by Stetson University. Franklin's rationale? It wasn't illegal, technically speaking, so why waste an opportunity? Quote, "We're going to go wherever we have to go to find players," Franklin said, according to various reports. "We're going to read the rules and understand the rules, and like you guys have heard me say before, it's not like we're going to lack for enthusiasm or lack for work ethic. We'll go wherever we've got to go." SEC and ACC coaches hated the audacity of Franklin's plan. Then Ole Miss coach Hugh Freeze summed up their thoughts in a 2014 article written by ESPN. Quote, "I don't particularly want another school in a BCS conference coming into our state and running a camp," Freeze said. "So we would like our rule," meaning the SEC rule, "to be a national rule." In the same article, Freeze's athletic director, Ross Bjork, now the AD at Ohio State, made reference to the SEC, quote, "protecting its turf."
Boy, that's some good whining. Are we sure this is the big bad SEC we're talking about?
They hadn't even gotten a load of what Harbaugh was going to do yet. Franklin walked so that Harbaugh could do barrel rolls in an F-16. In the summer of 2015, Michigan's coach announced his staff would be embarking on a, quote, "summer swarm" camp tour. Wolverines coaches would be guest instructors at camps in 9 cities: Detroit, Indianapolis, Easton, Pennsylvania, Fresno and Mission Viejo, California, Houston and Grand Prairie, Texas, Tampa, Florida, and Prattville, Alabama. It was that last one that got the attention of a certain SEC coach. Quote, if we're going to travel all over the country to have satellite camps, how ridiculous is that? Nick Saban posited in 2015. I mean, we're not allowed to go to all-star camps, but now we're going to have satellite camps all over the country, so it doesn't really make sense.
Something tells me Nick wouldn't have been so ornery if Harbaugh had just kept his grubby paws out of Alabama.
Harbaugh was just getting started. The following summer, Michigan had planned a far more ambitious ground offensive that would take Harbaugh's staff to 38 camps covering 21 states, plus stops in Australia and American Samoa in 29 days. Among the scheduled stops were southern camps in Atlanta and Leesburg, Georgia, Jacksonville, Fort Lauderdale, and Tampa, Florida, Norfolk, Virginia, Waco, Houston, and Addison, Texas, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Columbia, South Carolina, Pearl, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama. The SEC and ACC tried to stop Harbaugh in his tracks and temporarily succeeded. The ACC introduced a rule to ban satellite camps nationwide, and for a few weeks, the rule was adopted. Eventually, the NCAA rescinded that and allowed satellite camps to persist that summer, which drew an all-time Saban meltdown that May. Thanks to AL.com, we can relive Saban's words. After stating that he didn't want to discuss satellite camps, Saban spent 5 minutes bemoaning their existence, at one point smacking the podium and calling it the, quote, Wild, Wild West.
A couple more. Would your position be different if you were still coaching in the Big Ten? In other words, do you blame Jim Harbaugh for wanting to get outside of that region?
I'm not blaming Jim Harbaugh. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying it's bad for college football. Jim Harbaugh can do whatever he wants to do. I'm not saying anything bad about him if he thinks that's what's best. There needs to be somebody that looks out for what's best for the game, not what's best for the Big Ten or not what's best for the SEC or not what's best for Jim Harbaugh, but what's best for the game of college football, the integrity of the game, the coaches, the players, and the people that play it. All right, that's bigger than all this. So that's what somebody should do. Now, who's doing that? I don't know. Because right now, since we have the Power Five, everybody's politicking for what they want, for their conference.
Who would you want as a
there needs to be a
national
commissioner. There needs to be a college football commissioner.
Who would you want for that role?
The football coach doth protest too much, methinks.
Sure, but wouldn't we want to see a Northern coach do the same thing if the roles were reversed? We spent a huge chunk of our Players episode lamenting the South coming up to steal Northern players. Now, here was the North showing the South that turnabout was fair play. The most frustrating part of the South siphoning off Northern talent was the lack of pushback, just vague references to cheating and doing things the right way. Well, here was someone from the North finally putting the South on its heels. It was jarring. The satellite camp thing eventually fizzled out. In truth, it's hard to say precisely what the impact was other than Northern coaches ticking off Southern coaches, but there's value in that. The North wasn't going to take one big swing and knock the South off its pedestal. These were jabs, little actions made in an effort to soften the South's grip on the sport. Maybe you can't draw a straight line from the satellite camp push to a significant uptick in the number of Southern players heading north, but it helped some. And maybe we underestimated it at the time, but this was some early offense in the North's attempt to wrest some of that Southern power away. It wouldn't happen overnight, but the shirtless guy at the camp in Alabama was the same guy lifting the national championship trophy 8 years later. It paid off. Harbaugh really kicked the satellite camp phenomenon into high gear. And as laid out in episode 4, he was also on the leading edge of advocating that players should be paid.
And also, everyone who wasn't born with a Michigan binky in their mouth thinks that he cheated to win his national championship in 2023.
There's that too. And in this context, there are two sides to that. Listen, we're not going to spend a chunk of this episode deviating into a conversation about Michigan, Connor Stallion, sign stealing, and whatever role it may or may not have had in helping Harbaugh level up Michigan. As we record this, the NCAA has yet to issue its final verdict on the scope and the potential punishments. A narrative podcast for another time, perhaps. Isn't it fascinating either way, though? Especially as we dissect Northern ideologies and how they may have held the North back while the South ascended. A Michigan man is not the first candidate that comes to mind when searching for someone in the North who might start pushing the envelope. Yet, Harbaugh stirred the hornet's nest. Yet, it was Michigan, of all places, that found itself embroiled in an on-field scandal while simultaneously dispatching Saban's Alabama in the college football playoff and ending a near-decade run of Southern championships. Whatever you think of the Stallion stuff, this much is true. Michigan was searching for any edge it could find in pursuit of a championship. Who does that sound like?
Franklin and Harbaugh's satellite camp pushes came on the heels of Brett Bielema leaving Wisconsin, a team at the top of the Big Ten, for an SEC also ran in Arkansas. Bielema was telling you that he believed he didn't have everything he needed in the North to win at the highest levels. Harbaugh and Franklin, the former now a national title winner and the latter one of the favorites to win it in 2025, refused to throw their hands up at the disadvantages, some of which were real, some perceived, some self-inflicted, and instead found ways to overcome them. Yes, perhaps even taking that too far in the case of Michigan. But they're strong examples of the North having better coaching than it did for much of the 25 years we've been analyzing. And they're both from the North. Franklin grew up in Pennsylvania, got his head coaching start in the SEC at Vanderbilt, and then returned home to Penn State. Harbaugh was a legendary Michigan player, born in Ohio but part of a nomadic football family that lived all over the country. He came home and led the Wolverines to the mountaintop. Harbaugh is out of college football. He returned to the NFL as the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. He will forever be a complex figure. Whatever your view on him, he did help chart a new course for Northern college football. To continue succeeding, the North needs more coaches to pick up that mantle. We think that's happening. Let me tell you about William Jewell College. It's a small private liberal arts school founded in 1849 in Liberty, Missouri, about 20 miles northeast of Kansas City. It boasts among its notable alumni the guy who created U.S. Route 66, a co-founder of what is now the National Lacrosse League, an actor who starred on the television series Dallas, former Valparaiso men's basketball coach and college basketball Hall of Famer Homer Drew, a United States Army general, and two mega-important Northern college football coaches. The first is legendary Kansas State coach Bill Snyder. You remember him from episode 1. He got the Wildcats to the doorstep of playing for a BCS title twice, coming up just short each time. But he won 215 games at K-State and went into the College Football Hall of Fame in 2015. The other William Jewell alum turned Northern head coach is Oregon's coach Dan Lanning. Lanning is a grinder. A profile of Lanning by The Athletic in 2024 details him working as a server at Outback Steakhouse while playing linebacker for William Jewell. He started his coaching journey as a high school assistant in Missouri, then turned into a college football journeyman with graduate assistantships at Pitt and Arizona State, followed by a stint as the recruiting coordinator at Sam Houston State in Texas, before finding his way to the SEC. He's not from the South, but Lanning has the profile of someone who'd never leave the SEC once he got there. He was a graduate assistant on Saban's 2015 national championship team. After a 2-year stint as a linebackers coach and recruiting coordinator at Memphis, Saban wanted to bring Lanning back to Tuscaloosa as one of his 10 on-field assistants. A Saban protege, Kirby Smart, beat him to it, hiring Lanning to coach Georgia's linebackers in 2018 instead. Lanning was elevated to defensive coordinator at Georgia in 2019 and won a national championship in that role in 2021. Like Smart, who had the Saban boost before him as a member of championship staffs at Alabama, Lanning was a hotshot young coordinator on the rise who learned at the feet of college football's preeminent coaching masters. Given his career arc, it's a bit remarkable that Lanning is in the North. We told you all about the northern brain drain to the south and how Saban and Urban Meyer, sons of the North, ignited an era of Southern dominance. There aren't many examples of the inverse. He's early in his tenure, but Oregon may have found one in Lanning. According to reporting from the Oregonian, the Ducks only got Lanning after Cal head coach Justin Wilcox turned down the job. In that same cycle, 2 SEC programs hired new head coaches. LSU hired Brian Kelly from Notre Dame, and Florida hired Billy Napier from Louisiana. The Oregon job was Lanning's first as a head coach. It's reasonable that programs in the top half of the SEC wouldn't want to hand their program over to a first-timer, but it's still surprising that he's not in the SEC when you consider that 11 of the current 16 SEC head coaches had previously been SEC assistants. It's more surprising when you consider that Georgia gave Smart his first head coaching job in 2016, and that has paid off handsomely. Still, the series of dominoes led to Oregon getting Lanning in 2022 on a 6-year deal that would pay him $4.6 million per year. It was a bargain. Lanning is 35-6 in 3 seasons at Oregon, with a college football playoff berth in 2024 when the Ducks were Big Ten champs and the only unbeaten regular season team in FBS. Lanning is aggressive on the field in his style of play and off the field with how he builds a roster. With him at the helm, Oregon has evolved into one of the premier recruiting outfits in the country and looks like it will be a mainstay in the national title conversation every year. How do we really know what's working at Oregon? The SEC has tried to steal Lanning back. He was linked to the Auburn job that opened before his first season in Eugene was even over. The Tigers, in typical SEC fashion, had fired head coach Brian Harsin 8 games into his second season, and Lanning was reportedly on the short list of desired replacements.
Yeah, Dan, over the weekend there was a report that you had mutual interest with Auburn. I was curious if you'd like to address that.
Yeah, first off, I'll say when things like this are going to come up when you have team success and when you do your job and things go the way they're supposed to go. That's credit really to our team. That being said, I think there's a little bit of a problem in society today with people looking for what's next and where there's an opportunity. And the reality is, the grass is not always greener. In fact, the grass is damn green in Eugene, right? And I want to be here in Eugene for as long as Eugene will have me. This place has everything that I could possibly ever want, my family could ever want.
Nike has since made t-shirts with "The grass is damn green in Eugene" emblazoned on the chest. You'll see approximately 1 million of them at any Oregon home game. When Saban retired at Alabama after the 2023 season, Lanning's name was again at the top of the list of replacements. He stayed at Oregon and was rewarded in early 2025 with an amended contract that will now pay him $11 million per year. The only coaches making more than Lanning? The 3 active national championship winners: Smart at Georgia, Ryan Day at Ohio State, and Dabo Swinney at Clemson. The South let a star assistant slip away, tried to lure him back twice, and the North stepped up to keep him. That is a different world from the one we described in episode 2. The North has become more competitive with assistant coach pay as well. According to USA Today's college football coaching salary database, 5 of the 9 assistants who made at least $2 million in 2024 were from the North, including both coordinators at Utah. 10 of the 25 assistants who made at least $1.5 million were from the North, including coaches from Iowa, Michigan State, and Rutgers. And again, those numbers don't include data from the staffs at Notre Dame and Penn State, both of which keep their salary information private. Think about that for a second. We told you in episode 2 about Nick Saban leaving Michigan State for LSU in 1999, getting a bump in his salary from $700,000 to $1.3 million. Now, Michigan State pays its offensive line coach $1 million. The North is also making more bold and inspired coaching decisions. Notre Dame replacing Brian Kelly with Marcus Freeman, a first-time head coach, was risky. Kelly had won 171 games, including 2 Division II national titles at Grand Valley State, before he ever coached a game at Notre Dame. Freeman had been an assistant coach at Ohio State, Kent State, Purdue, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame, but never a head coach, and had only been a coordinator since 2016 when Notre Dame tapped him to run the program in 2021. The gamble has paid off. Freeman has won 33 games in his first 3 seasons, including taking Notre Dame to the national championship game in 2024. He has a 767 winning percentage at Notre Dame. Kelly had a 739 winning percentage in South Bend. Freeman has also pushed Notre Dame past some of the roster building limitations that seemed to drive Kelly to the SEC in the first place. What was it that Dan Lanning said about green grass? Anyway, Indiana opted for the winning pedigree of Curt Cignetti, ignoring pushback on giving a 63-year-old head coach his first shot in major college football. The Hoosiers had their best season ever in 2024, winning 11 games and making the playoff. Cignetti wins and talks trash to the SEC. He's like a swaggy northern grandpa with no filter, a Pittsburgh native and West Virginia grad telling the South to cram it. That's a win for the North. Syracuse gave former Georgia defensive backs coach Fran Brown his first head coaching job in 2024. By tapping into his New Jersey/Mid-Atlantic roots, working the transfer portal, and infusing the program with some swagger, Brown went 10-3 in his first season, handing Miami a loss in the final week of the regular season that knocked the Hurricanes out of the ACC championship and a likely college football playoff spot. Deion Sanders is a Florida State legend who should, maybe, be the head coach in Tallahassee. Instead, he's resurrected a dormant Colorado program. Doug, you did a lot of legwork on diving into the machinations of Northern coaching moves during our 25-year period. How are you feeling about where the North is now with its coaches?
Dare I say that there's some real ingenuity in the hires? That means hiring smart and retaining aggressively. Cignetti at Indiana, Lance Leipold at Kansas, and Chris Kleiman at Kansas State were lower-level winners given a shot to step up. Matt Campbell at Iowa State and P.J. Fleck at Minnesota came from a familiar MAC pipeline, but they've won and stayed. Bigger programs or Southern programs haven't swiped them. They're both closing in on a decade in those gigs. Brown and Freeman were such smart chances to take on young first-time head coaches. And hires like Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, and Matt Rule at Nebraska don't have direct connections to those schools, but they were real attempts at Northern culture fits. We have a culture.
We do have a culture. And I also just think the coaching in the North is markedly better than it was for a lot of the 25 years we've been talking about. That doesn't mean the South has bad coaches. It just means there's no Saban in the South, and the coaching in the North seems more on par, if not better in some instances. Most of the guys you named are performing at a high level at their respective programs. Others still have promise. I'd also tip the cap to someone like Ryan Day at Ohio State. The Buckeyes have never really been bad, but he's kept it humming in Columbus with a natty in 2024 and by winning almost 90% of his games. That certainly wasn't a guarantee when he was promoted to the job as a first-time head coach to replace Meyer in 2019. At Penn State, Franklin's got an Ohio State hill to climb, but he's finished in the top 10 5 times in the last 9 years. Penn State's last span with 5 top 5 finishes, 1991 to 2005. So Franklin has elevated Penn State. And you no longer hear Northern coaches griping about not having the resources to contend with Southern powers. Most of the griping we hear nowadays comes from SEC coaches and administrators who want to remind us how tough their league is as the sport settles back to a place of balance.
So attitudes are changing. The North seems to have a more aggressive posture. The coaching is better. There's one piece left to our puzzle. Can the North keep pace with the South when it comes to the talent on the field? I want to tell 2 stories about player acquisition. They both involve Brian Kelly, the former Notre Dame coach now at LSU, and his, well, there's no other way to say it, whining about losing players to Northern programs in ways that illustrate why we think the world is different now. The number 1 player in the 2025 recruiting class was a quarterback from the North named Bryce Underwood. He's from Belleville, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, and he's good, as his ranking would indicate. There's a nice database kept by 24/7 Sports of the best high school prospects by position since 2000. Underwood is the 7th best quarterback behind Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Bryce Young, Vince Young, Quinn Ewers, and Brock Berlin. As a prospect, Underwood has been compared to Vince Young, Cam Newton, and Josh Allen. No pressure, kid. Underwood is the type of prospect the North can't afford to lose. For a time, LSU was primed to steal him. Underwood committed to the Tigers on January 6, 2024, from a group of finalists that also included Michigan, Alabama, Colorado, Penn State, Florida State, and Oregon. It felt like mostly an LSU versus Michigan thing. LSU won. Michigan won the national title a few days later, so the full brunt of losing out on a prospect like Underwood wasn't felt initially. But Underwood lingered as a Northern five-star committed South, the kind of situation that happened too often when the South was dominating college football. Michigan swung back with the help of a billionaire. Jo-Lin Zhu is a 2012 graduate of Michigan with a degree in international studies. Why is she important to this story? She loves Michigan football, wants to see it succeed at the highest levels, and is married to the second richest man in the world, according to the latest data from Forbes. Software tycoon Larry Ellison grew up in Chicago. He attended the University of Illinois and the University of Chicago, but did not receive a degree from either institution. He co-founded the software company Oracle, and he's worth about $300 billion. Prior to his efforts in helping Michigan land Underwood, he had no known affiliation with the university or its football team. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal, the Ellisons became involved with Michigan's courtship of Underwood in September of 2024. That included Zoom calls where Jo-Lin spoke of her love for the university, and Larry spoke of being a self-made man who, did we mention, is filthy stinking rich? Tom Brady was involved too, reportedly having multiple standing phone calls with Underwood that fall. But I'm going to guess the bazillionaire had a larger impact. And hey, that's okay. It was all permissible under name, image, and likeness rules that have helped Northern programs maintain a more aggressive posture when it comes to roster building. LSU reportedly nabbed Underwood's initial commitment around terms that amounted to $1.5 million per year. With the Ellison spearheading Michigan's late flip, The Athletic reported that Underwood could make more than $10 million over the course of his Michigan career through various NIL agreements. Underwood's father told the Wall Street Journal he thought the number could exceed $15 million. We don't know exactly how much money is going directly from the Ellisons to Underwood. Safe to assume it's a nice chunk. It was nice enough to flip the five-star quarterback. Underwood committed to Michigan on November 21st, 2024. ESPN's resident NFL scoops guru and proud Michigan alum, Adam Schefter, broke the news to his more than 11 million followers on the social media app formerly known as Twitter. A few weeks later, on National Signing Day for the 2025 class, Kelly, who left Notre Dame for the big bad SEC, cried poor.
Mentioned in my opening remarks, this is a new landscape that we are in recruiting. And new when I say it's not just about finding the right fit academically. It's not just about finding the right fit where you can develop holistically and graduate and play for a championship. It's about what the most money I can get. And that's unfortunate, but it's the world we live in. And you have to be able to adapt, and you have to be able to realign and be prepared.
Kelly, who signed a 10-year, $95 million deal to be LSU's coach in 2021, gave those remarks from a podium with a strategically placed Coca-Cola bottle in front of him and Farm Bureau insurance logos on the backdrop behind him. Bill, how delicious is this?
I think if we wrote a script about how things would pan out for a Northern coach who fled south because things were too hard, this is what it would look like.
Thank you, Brian Kelly, for being part of this series. One more quicker story. LSU was in the mix for a defensive tackle transfer named CJ West in the spring of 2024. West was a 3-star prospect from Chicago, once committed to Minnesota, who fell through the cracks and ended up at Kent State, where he blossomed into one of the best players in the MAC. Among his offers when he transferred were LSU, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Miami, Michigan, Wisconsin, Colorado, and more. West committed to Indiana, a huge portal win for Curt Cignetti. It felt like maybe West would go to LSU. He didn't. And you'll never guess what Kelly did. He cried poor. Here's a quote from an interview Kelly did with WAFB TV in Baton Rouge after West picked the Hoosiers. Quote, I made it pretty clear that we were in the market in the transfer portal for defensive linemen, Kelly said. It hasn't fared well, quite frankly, because we're selling something a bit different. We want to recruit, engage, build relationships, develop and retain players, and have you have success. We're not in the market of buying players. Unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They want to be bought. Did I mention Kelly makes almost $10 million per year? He was right to be upset. West was good in the Big Ten, too, helping Indiana to a playoff berth and getting selected in the 4th round of the 2025 NFL draft by the San Francisco 49ers. The point of all that isn't so much to make fun of Kelly, although it's partly that. It's to demonstrate how the world is different. Maybe the Michigan thing will be an outlier. How many Forbes list billionaires are going to be in the business of funding college football recruiting, really? Indiana besting LSU and other more prominent programs in the North and South for West is more illustrative of a world where programs previously absent from the premier recruiting battles can rise up and win. We'll also note that Indiana landed Cal transfer quarterback Fernando Mendoza, one of the most sought-after and highly ranked transfers at his position in the 2025 cycle. Indiana!
Can I drop something on you that I think will get you pretty excited?
Oh, please do.
I looked through the blue chip prospects in the 2026 recruiting class. Some of the data is what you'd expect, meaning about 2/3 of the 4- and 5-star prospects in the class are from the South. That tracks with all of the recruiting data we combed through for this project. The South typically has upwards of 2/3 of the premier high school talent in its backyard. Here's what's different. On the short list of teams with double-digit Southern blue chip prospects committed, Notre Dame.
Okay. This section can be short. The North is getting it done.
They are, but there's more to get into. We're not here to tell you that the geographical realities of college football are changing. The North does, and likely always will, suffer a disadvantage in terms of the number of very good high school players in its region. Let's look at the 2025 recruiting class. Again, about 2/3 of the blue chip prospects were from the South. The high school output is the same, but Northern classes look a little bit different. They look a little bit better. There's an average player rating that 24/7 Sports assigns to each recruiting class, a 4-digit evaluation that helps sift through the quantitative overall scores to gain a better understanding of the quality within each class. The average player in Northern recruiting classes is getting better. In 2010, the average player for our 28 Northern teams had a score of 85.05. It was actually worse in 2015, 84.78, and then it jumped in 2020 to 86.78 and jumped again in 2025 to 87.97. So basically 88, and for context, an 89 is a 4-star prospect. So the average player in the North was almost a 4-star prospect. The percentage of blue chip recruits in Northern classes has also increased over that span, from a low of 22.1% in 2015 up to almost 33% in both 2020 and 2025. There was still a gap between the North and the South in average player rating and blue chip percentage in 2025, Northern rosters are better, but they'll never fully close the gap, not unless there's some kind of reversal in where the best high school players are. But the North seems to be doing a better job of making sure the gap isn't insurmountable. The North is being more aggressive going after Southern prospects too, and finding more success. The North signed 44 Southern blue chippers in 2025. That was up from 27 in 2020 and 18 in 2015. That also included some high-profile wins for the North and the South. The North will probably never be able to replicate something like what we saw in 2010 when the South landed 5 of the 7 Northern 5-star prospects. But the North can take swings and win, as we saw in the 2025 class when Oregon got a 5-star receiver from Texas and a 5-star corner from Alabama. Ohio State took a 5-star corner from Texas. Colorado landed a high 4-star top 50 overall quarterback from Georgia. 4 blue chippers from Alabama went north. 5 of the top 15 players in Texas went north. And 13 of the state's whopping 70 blue chip prospects went north. The best player in the 2024 class, receiver Jeremiah Smith, was from Florida. He went to Ohio State. Nebraska used familial ties and presumably substantial NIL funds to flip Dylan Raiola, the number 3 quarterback in the country, from Georgia after he had transferred to a high school in Georgia to position himself closer to the Dogs and help them build their recruiting class. It will never be a level playing field, but the North can and is holding its own better. The world is smaller. Northern teams aren't shy about mobilizing NIL efforts. Paying for players is cool now, and it's legal. And the North has cash. The gap has closed some. We told you in episode 4 how former Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delaney stated in 2007 that he wished the Big Ten could have had 6 of the top 10 recruiting classes, which is what the SEC achieved that year. However, quote, discipline and restraint prevented the conference from reaching that goal. What was left unsaid is that the Big Ten didn't have a single top 10 recruiting class in 2007. That's not good enough. Fast forward to 2025, the Big Ten had 3 top 10 classes, with Ohio State, Oregon, and Michigan finishing 4th, 5th, and 6th, respectively. The advent of name, image, and likeness payments influencing recruiting decisions washed away some of that discipline and restraint. And wouldn't you know it, the North started recruiting better, even overcoming some of its geographical disadvantages.
And we haven't even discussed the transfer portal yet. That new layer of roster building that didn't exist for much of the 25-year era of Southern dominance has helped the North solve roster problems. There's not a Joe Burrow equivalent, a dynamo of a transfer quarterback who swapped regions and ignited a national championship team the way Burrow did at LSU in 2019. But the North has gotten close a couple times. Bo Nix, an Alabama kid and Auburn legacy who picked the Tigers out of high school, transferred to Oregon in 2022 and became a Heisman Trophy finalist in 2023 for a Ducks team that was on the cusp of playoff contention. Justin Fields had a pair of dynamic seasons at Ohio State, reaching the college football playoff semifinals in 2019 and the national championship game in 2020, finishing 3rd in the Heisman voting in 2019 and 7th in 2020. That's a Georgia kid whom the Bulldogs initially managed to keep home after flipping him from Penn State, but he flourished in the North. Some others, maybe more off the radar. Running back Dylan Johnson was a 1,000-yard rusher for Washington during its run to the national championship in 2023 after transferring from Mississippi State. Linebacker Nick Jackson transferred from Virginia to Iowa in 2022 and finished his career as one of the most prolific tacklers in the history of college football with 555. Jackson Meeks caught 10 passes at Georgia over 3 seasons, then grabbed 78 receptions for 1,021 yards at Syracuse in 2024.
The portal allows for second swings at players too, and often chances to bring guys back home. Corey Kiner was an Ohio Mr. Football winner who left his home in Cincinnati to play for LSU. He then transferred back to the University of Cincinnati in 2022, started 24 games for the Bearcats, and finished his career number 8 on the program's all-time career rushing list. Donovan McMillan was a standout prep player in Western Pennsylvania who went to Florida out of high school. He transferred back home to Pitt in 2023 and was second team All ACC in 2024 after leading the Panthers in tackles in back-to-back seasons. Fadil Diggs is a Jersey kid who left Texas A&M to play for Fran Brown at Syracuse in 2024, leading a surprise 10-win team in tackles for loss and sacks. The 4 Northern teams that have played for the national title over the last 2 years were all enhanced by transfers. Michigan had center Drake Nugent from Stanford and cornerback Josh Wallace from UMass on its 2023 championship roster. Washington countered in that title game with Johnson from Mississippi State, quarterback Michael Penix Jr. from Indiana, and cornerback Jabbar Muhammad from Oklahoma State. The 2024 national champion Ohio State Buckeyes had All-American safety Caleb Downs from Alabama, stud running back Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, and quarterback Will Howard from Kansas State. Notre Dame opposed them with quarterback Riley Leonard from Duke, receiver Bo Collins from Clemson, and standout kicker Mitch Jeter from South Carolina.
Transfer kickers. Now we're really talking Northern ball.
James Franklin did say you go wherever you got to go. For too long, the North just let the realities of geography and roster building happen to it, rather than seek ways around it. Had the sport not changed to legalize paying players, or at least muddy the waters to the point that what's legal is almost undefinable, it's likely we'd still be talking about a Southern-dominated sport. In some ways, the North got lucky that college football modernized the way it has, even if it's still a bit messy. Will the North have eventually changed its stance on aggressive roster building anyway? Perhaps. But in the end, it was more about the world changing around the North than the North changing its ways. Either way, progress was made.
All right, so where does that leave us? The North just owns college football now?
I don't think we'd be so bold to declare that. Although you
come on,
you might be. I'm a little more reserved, I think, with my declarations. It's no doubt different. There has been one thing that's been weighing on my mind is not the right way to say it, but I have been thinking about it, and maybe I've mentioned it to you before, but I'm curious what you think of this. So what are we to make of the sport for so long was basically only subjective. We didn't really play for national championships. And during that time, the sport was balanced. And then we got to a place where we, yes, used subjectivity to figure out who was going to play for the national championship, but then we at least decided who won it on the field. And then the South started winning all of the national titles. What am I supposed to do with that information that absent pure subjectivity, the North started to struggle?
Yeah, I think you possibly could conclude, hey, when you never knew, they just gave everybody a shot. I think someone from the South listening to this could conclude that. But I think it was more coincidental that right when the South got better, for all the reasons we've outlined, is also when the sport got more objectives. So what I would say now to be on alert for is, in an objective sport, do not let the subjectivity of the past affect the objective reality of now, which is, to say it more succinctly, we think the North has caught up on the field. Did it catch up in perception? It's objectively, I think the balance is back. Subjectively, is the balance back? That I'm curious about.
Right. And I don't know that we can say one way or the other definitively now. That's something that's going to take more than 1 year for the entire sport to sort of change its point of view on. But you and I are there. Also, I don't think we would have done this show. Right.
Yes.
The thing that I have been thinking about in conjunction with that is just whether or not there were serious sort of underlying issues with Northern ball that people didn't recognize until the sport became more objective, right? And then once it became objective and we looked under the hood and thought, boy, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, I can't believe you think this way. It took a quarter century to figure it all out, and now we're finally seeing the results of that.
For instance, it did take Tom Osborne and Nebraska a while to get over the top. on the national championship scene against those Florida schools, but then they finally did. And I think, in previous eras, I don't think anything Woody Hayes was doing at Ohio State or Bo Schembechler was doing at Michigan or Joe Paterno was doing at Penn State. I don't think it was that they couldn't measure up. If it would have been more objective, I think they would have. I think it's more about the demographic shift and the attitude shift that we've talked about. And a lot of it can feel like, oh, isn't that convenient? That right when the North had to beat the South to win a title, they stopped winning. I get it. But I think Osborne and Paterno and Hayes and Schembechler would have done their thing, given the chance.
Okay. I think I agree with you. Maybe I just wanted to play devil's advocate a little bit there as we finished our 5-part podcast series in the last 10 minutes of what we're talking about. I think it's probably worth revisiting some of the things we talked about in episode 1 to maybe put a bow on this thing. Our perceptions of the North during this 25-year period and what we think of them now. So we said something along the lines of, yes, the South was good. Yes, the South was to be respected. But the North, gave up too much ground, wasn't doing enough to fight back, just sort of let the monster become the monster and kind of accepted its fate. Do we think that the North acts that way now?
No, I don't think so. I think we get frustrated sometimes when the North doesn't pound its chest enough. We'd like a little more hype. We've talked about that with Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, for instance, that the perception battle is 365 days a year, and we think the North and the Big Ten should fight it. But I don't think the North seems as scared, right? As we did this, Bill, weren't there times where it felt like the North was almost scared to try, or that the North used to think that caring about football was crass? And I don't feel that anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if it was fear of trying to win at football. It was just, I don't know. Apologies to any academics out there, like misplaced priorities at times. We're not saying that education is not important. But when we're talking about it from a purely football perspective, the North was playing big time college football and in some respects paying people accordingly and certainly making the kind of money that you make from big time college football, just without the emphasis on kind of doing what it took to win at the highest level until, as we mentioned in this episode, some of those things became more palatable or in some respects legal. And then they started doing it, right? So, I mean, we characterize a lot of that as failure in episode 1, and I think that's the right way to put it. But I don't know that we sense the North failing as much when it comes to doing what it needs to do to win at the highest levels in college football.
Once upon a time, when Urban Meyer got to the Big Ten, there was a lot of talk about the gentleman's agreement that the Big Ten had with each other about not recruiting committed players, and Urban Meyer said the heck with that. I think during this period, for at least a lot of it, the North was too gentlemanly.
Yes.
And now the Big Ten is a little less library than it used to be.
We like that, right? We like a library. We're not anti-library here at Kings of the North, but we're also pro-ball.
Yes.
maybe sometimes one needs to supersede the other. So
we seek a books and ball balance.
We do, yes.
It's a little book heavy there for a quarter century.
It was. The sport became imbalanced, and then the North itself was imbalanced between the books and the ball, I think is a right way to put it. So you don't think now that the failure piece that we discussed in this 25-year window is, we think the North is doing a much better job of that, right? And it's not just like the Ohio States and the Michigans of the world. We think some of the less obvious Northern programs are probably doing a better job of that too.
I think you see that. I think you see Northern programs having some of their best seasons ever. That Ohio State and Michigan both got close in 2022, lost semifinals they probably should have won, and then they turned that into titles in 23 and 24. So let's see what Notre Dame and Penn State and Oregon do after their great 2024 seasons that fell short. What can they do in 2025? And then Iowa State and BYU and Colorado and Syracuse and Indiana, they had great 2024 seasons. How do they follow up those breakthroughs? And don't we think programs like Illinois and Minnesota and Kansas State and Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Washington, and a lot of those schools were good in the past, but they're kind of on a little bit of an upswing. And we think Utah could be ready for a bounce back. So I think that idea of fail, it's a much, much smaller font on that in the Northern football word cloud.
I think that's right. And I'm reminded a little bit of what we discussed in episode 1 too. Like some of the shortcomings that we lamented. Yeah, there was an Ohio State in there, and certainly like Notre Dame got into the college football playoff a couple of times and kind of got run off the field. But those Kansas State teams we discussed got close. Oregon, before what it was now, got close. West Virginia was there for a year or two. Kansas kind of broke through and was almost there. Like I don't want to speak for you, but I think you and I would agree that beyond the Northern Blue Bloods, the sport just seems to be in a position where maybe one of these other schools can break through for a title, similar to how they were doing in the 25 years that predated the 25 we've been looking at, right? When we talked about Pitt had a national championship. Penn State had a couple in there, although Penn State's probably a blue blood, right? There's just
Washington, Colorado,
Washington was in there, Colorado
BYU.
was in there. Yeah, it was just like a world where that wasn't crazy, right? Right?
Yeah.
And then like if you would have said that at any point, probably from about the time Urban Meyer showed up in Florida through Georgia's most recent national title, the mere suggestion that a team like BYU or Pitt or Colorado could contend for a national title would get you laughed out of the room. And I don't know that we're guaranteeing that that's going to happen anytime soon, but we think that in addition to the Northern Powers being better positioned to win national championships, some of those other programs might actually be in a world where breaking through becomes more attainable.
And in a more objective sport, getting in the playoff and winning a game or two also becomes part of success. That I think we will be less defined by only national championships, and we certainly focused on national championships in this 25-year period, but the playoff gives us also a larger lens in which to view winning, and I think we just ran through a bunch of teams that we think can be in that mix, with as many Northern teams in that mix as Southern teams.
Right. So we don't say any of this to say that the North suddenly owns college football. I think we definitely acknowledge that the South did. The quarter century of utter supremacy was undeniable. Like the facts are the facts. That's who won the national championships. And I think we've done a good job of laying out the North's missteps that allowed that to happen. Coaching, players, attitudes, all those things threw it out of whack. But I want to recall one more thing from episode 1 that really kind of gets to the crux of what we've been talking about here. It was not going from a Southern-dominated sport to a Northern-dominated sport. It was getting back to a world that existed prior to 1998. It was admittedly more subjective, but still, it was the way of college football, where the national championship, as we said, was geographically impartial. It did not belong to one section of the country for prolonged stretches of time. It sort of ping-ponged back and forth every year. And we think that's where the sport might be now after these 25 years of Southern dominance.
And again, partly through things that the North decided to change, partly through things in the sport that just happened to change. But we think the result is that with the changes in the structure of the sport, with back-to-back Northern champions, with back-to-back All-North championship games, this balance has returned to college football. And the unchecked reign of Southern dominance while the North lay dormant is over. Landis, winter has ended.
The 25-Year Winter, How Championship College Football Went Dormant in the North, is written and researched by Doug Lesmerises and me, Bill Landis. Michael Henahan is our producer and composer.
Ryan Nanny and Stephen Godfrey are our executive producers. To catch our daily college football show, search for Kings of the North College Football on YouTube.